I never thought life could turn so cruel so quickly. I never imagined that after losing my mother so young, instead of being embraced with love and protection, I would be treated as though I were a burden, a mistake, a shadow that did not deserve the light. And it all began the moment my father remarried. The moment Cassandra and her mother walked into our mansion with their perfect smiles and polished shoes and eyes full of calculation, because from that very day, everything changed. The house that once felt like home became a prison where I was no longer the daughter of the house, but the maid of it. And Cassandra, who was supposed to be my sister, turned into my tormentor, my cruel queen, who relished in breaking me down piece by piece. Day after day, she found new ways to remind me of my place, new humiliations to pile onto my weary shoulders, and I accepted them with a silence that made her stronger. Because she thought silence meant weakness. She thought my bowed head meant surrender. But deep inside, it was survival. It was me clinging to the hope that one day, somehow, life would remember me. One day, someone would stand for me, though I never dared say it out loud. Not even when she paraded me before her friends, laughing. As she introduced me not as her sister, but as the house help who happens to share my last name. And they laughed. They always laughed. Because Cassandra had the beauty, the confidence, the charm that drew people to her like moths to a flame, while I stood in the background in hand-me-down clothes with tired eyes, clutching a tray, trying to keep my hands from shaking as I served lemonade. And in those moments I felt smaller than dust. Yet even as they mocked, I kept my eyes lowered and my lips sealed. Because if there was one thing I refused to give Cassandra, it was the sight of my tears. Though at night in the silence of my room, I cried into my pillow, muffling the sobs until they ached in my throat, because crying in front of her would only fuel her cruelty, and so I lived each day in quiet despair, a servant in my own home, polishing her jewelry, ironing her gowns, scrubbing her messes, cooking her meals, all while she clicked her tongue and reminded me of my failures. "You're so slow. Can't you do anything right?" she would snap. And when her mother was around, she encouraged her, "Don't spoil her, Cassandra. She must learn her place." And I wanted to scream that I had a place, that this was my home too, that I was not worthless, but the words always died in my chest because they made me believe that no one would hear me even if I shouted, that I was invisible, a ghost drifting through my own life. And that might have been my fate forever had I not carried a secret deep inside, a truth that Cassandra never knew, that I was not as alone as she believed, because I had 3 brothers older than me who had left years ago to chase dreams bigger than this house. 3 brothers who had walked out with promises in their eyes saying, "We'll come back for you, little one. Just wait for us." And though Cassandra mocked me endlessly whenever I mentioned them, sneering, "If they cared, they'd be here. But they're not. They left you because you're nothing." I clung to their memory like a lifeline, because I knew the truth. I knew they left not because they didn't care, but because they cared too much. Because they wanted to build a future for us. They wanted to make something of themselves. So I wouldn't have to bow to anyone, but I never reached out to them, not once, because I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to distract them from the empires they were building. So I bore the weight alone, whispering their names, like prayers when nights were too long, and though Cassandra and her mother dismissed them as myths, laughing at me when I insisted they existed, I kept faith, and that faith was the only thing that kept me from collapsing completely, until one day Cassandra announced with the excitement of a queen ascending her throne that she had been invited to the grand gala of the season, the event where the city's most powerful gathered, where fortunes were flaunted and reputations cemented. And from that moment, she turned the house into chaos, shrieking orders, demanding dresses, jewelry, shoes, hair appointments, and all of it fell on me. I steamed her gowns until my fingers burned, polished diamonds until my eyes blurred, scrubbed her shoes until my back ached, and when her friends came over, they sat and laughed, pointing at me as though I were an exhibit. "She really does treat you like a maid," one giggled, and Cassandra smirked. "That's all she's good for." And they laughed louder, the sound echoing inside me like knives scraping against bone. But I smiled faintly, bowed my head, and continued my work, because that was my survival. Silence was my armor, though inside me something twisted, something grew restless, a tiny spark that refused to be crushed. And when the night of the gala came, I thought maybe I could escape. Maybe I could lock myself in my room and let her bask in her glory alone. But Cassandra had other plans. She burst into my room with a smirk, tossing a plain black dress at me. Not elegant, not beautiful, but something resembling a servant's uniform. "You're coming with me," she said, coldly. "Oh, but don't get any ideas. You're not a guest. You're there to serve me, to carry my things, to stay out of the way unless I need you, and don't you dare embarrass me." Her words were sharp as blades, and before I could protest, she dragged me along, dressed herself in a glittering silver gown that shimmered like moonlight, her hair styled in perfect curls, her lips painted a seductive red, while I was shoved into the plain dress, my hair tied back without care, my feet shoved into old shoes that pinched my skin. And when we arrived at the gala, my breath caught, because I had never seen such splendor. Chandeliers hung like constellations, music floated through the air like silk. The rich and powerful mingled, their laughter mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. And for a moment, I forgot my shame. I forgot my pain, until Cassandra yanked me forward, her smile wide as she greeted people. And then, with the sweetness of honey but the cruelty of poison, she announced loudly, "Oh, don't mind her, she's just my stepsister. She insists on tagging along. But honestly, she's much better at serving than socializing." And the crowd chuckled politely, their eyes sliding over me with pity or disdain. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, but I bowed my head and forced a smile, taking the tray a waiter handed me and moving through the crowd, offering champagne. My hands trembling as I tried not to spill, while Cassandra twirled and laughed and sparkled under the chandeliers, basking in admiration, and I was the shadow that followed, invisible except when she needed me to pick up something she dropped or hold her clutch. And each time she made sure to do it in front of others, to humiliate me further. And though my heart ached, though humiliation pressed so heavy on me I thought I would collapse, I forced myself to keep moving, to keep breathing, because deep inside, in the quiet corners of my soul, I felt a strange stillness, a whisper that told me this was not forever, that somewhere out there my brothers lived, powerful and strong, and that one day they would return. One day this suffering would end, and as I bent down to pick up Cassandra's clutch for the 5th time, hearing her friends laugh, I made a vow, silent but unbreakable, that I would endure, that I would survive. And when the time came, when the tides turned, Cassandra would no longer stand above me. The world would see her for what she was, and I would finally rise, because though she thought I was nothing, she had no idea who stood behind me. No idea of the power waiting to return. And that night, as I lay in bed, tears soaking my pillow, listening to Cassandra gloat about her admirers and the whispers of the gala, I clutched that vow like a secret flame, small but fierce, and I whispered to myself in the darkness, "Just wait, Cassandra. The day will come." The days after that, Gala blurred into endless repetitions of humiliation, Cassandra waking me before dawn with her shrill voice demanding tea, her clothes pressed, her shoes polished, her assignments completed before she even rose from bed. And I obeyed in silence because to defy her meant sharper insults, crueler punishments, and I was tired of bleeding inside, tired of being told I was worthless, so I endured, carrying the weight of servitude with quiet steps. but something had changed inside me. A quiet rebellion, a vow that had taken root, and it kept me steady as Cassandra grew bolder, flaunting her power not just in private but in public, belittling me at every turn, turning me into a spectacle for her friends, reminding me daily that I was nothing but her servant. But what she never understood was that the world beyond our gates was moving, shifting, and fate was aligning itself in ways she could never have imagined. Because far away, in boardrooms wrapped in glass towers and offices filled with power, my brothers were remembering the little sister they had left behind, the one they had sworn to protect. And though I had not called, though I had borne my pain in silence, news had a way of traveling. Whispers carried by employees, photos shared on social pages of Cassandra, parading me around as her servant at the gala. And one such image found its way into the wrong hands. Or perhaps the right ones, because it was my eldest brother Alexander who first saw it, a man known for his steel heart and unshakable will. The CEO of a multinational empire, whose very name could silence rooms, and when his eyes landed on that photo, on me in a plain, black dress carrying a tray behind Cassandra, something inside him snapped, the memory of his promise burning in his chest, and with a single call, everything began to change, for my brothers decided it was time to come home, to return, not as dreamers but as conquerors, not as boys, but as men who now commanded empires. And though I did not know it yet, my world was about to shift forever. But in the meantime, Cassandra basked in her temporary reign, oblivious to the storm approaching, and her next triumph came in the form of another gala, this one larger, more extravagant, hosted by one of the city's wealthiest families, and once again I was drafted into service, ironing her new crimson gown, polishing her diamonds until my hands ached, sewing last-minute adjustments while she twirled before the mirror, laughing at my tired reflection. "You'll never wear something like this. You know, people like you don't belong in gowns. You belong in uniforms," she sneered. And though my chest tightened, I said nothing, biting back words that would have meant nothing, because she thrived on the sting of my silence. But deep inside, I held onto that flame, growing stronger. And when the night of the gala arrived, she looked radiant in red, every eye turning as she descended the grand staircase, while I trailed behind once again, dressed plainly, holding her things, invisible to all but those who laughed at my disgrace. And as we entered the shimmering hall, the chandeliers brighter than before, the crowd richer, the laughter louder, I felt the sting of recognition, whispers beginning again. "That's her, the maid sister," they said. And Cassandra relished it, smiling sweetly as she introduced herself to the elite, making sure to dismiss me in the same breath. But what neither she nor I knew was that this night would not be like the last, because as I carried a tray through the throng, my eyes downcast, I felt the weight of a gaze, strong and unyielding, and when I lifted my eyes, I froze, my heart stumbling, because standing across the hall, framed by the glittering lights, was a man whose face I knew better than my own. Older now, sharper, dressed in a tailored black suit that spoke of power, his presence commanding the room. And though it had been years, there was no mistaking him, my brother Alexander, and for a moment I thought I was dreaming, my breath catching as his eyes locked on mine, filled with fury and something deeper, something protective. And before I could move, before I could call out, Cassandra's laughter pierced the air, drawing his attention as she basked in the admiration of wealthy men, tossing her hair, unaware of who had just walked in. And when she turned, her smile faltered, just slightly, because even she could feel it, the weight of Alexander's gaze, though she didn't know who he was, not yet, and in that moment I saw something shift in the crowd, whispers rising. "Isn't that Alexander Knight, the CEO? What's he doing here? And people straightened, respect flooding the room as he moved forward, cutting through the throng with quiet authority. And Cassandra, ever the opportunist, straightened her shoulders, her smile widening as she prepared to introduce herself, to sink her claws into him as she had with so many men before. But before she could speak, his voice cut through the music, low and sharp. "Sister," he said, and the word froze her smile. Froze the entire room, and in that moment every pair of eyes turned, confusion flickering, because Alexander Knight, the untouchable CEO, had just called me his sister, me, the girl in the plain dress, the one serving champagne. And I felt the world tilt, the humiliation of years colliding with the sudden rush of vindication. But Cassandra recovered quickly, her laugh brittle as she said, "Sister? Oh, you must be mistaken. She's just—" But he silenced her with a single look, his jaw tight, his fury barely contained, and in that silence the truth settled like a storm. People whispering, staring at me with new eyes, and though Cassandra tried to laugh it off, tried to regain her charm, it was too late, because Alexander had already crossed to me, taking the tray from my trembling hands and setting it aside, his hand steady on my shoulder as he said clearly, "She is my sister, my blood, and anyone who treats her otherwise will answer to me." And the room gasped, the music faltered, and I felt tears sting my eyes, not from humiliation this time, but from the overwhelming rush of being seen, being claimed, being protected. Yet even as my heart soared, Cassandra's face twisted, pale and furious, though she quickly masked it with a brittle smile, murmuring, "Of course, I didn't mean—" But Alexander ignored her, his attention fixed solely on me, his voice softer as he whispered, "I'm sorry we took so long, little one. But we're here now." And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change, though I couldn't yet imagine how far the tides would turn, how deep Cassandra's downfall would be, or how powerful the storm my brothers would unleash. But as the night went on, whispers grew, eyes lingered, and Cassandra's carefully constructed facade began to crack, because no matter how she tried to dazzle, she could not compete with the shadow of the man who now stood beside me, and though she smiled and laughed, her hands trembled, because for the first time she realized she was not in control. For the first time, she sensed the ground slipping beneath her feet, and I, for the first time in years, felt the faint taste of hope, sweet and terrifying. Because though Alexander's presence had already shifted the world, I knew he was not alone. I knew my other brothers would come, and when they did, Cassandra's reign would end forever. But for now, in that glittering hall filled with stunned faces and fractured whispers, the war had quietly begun. The days that followed the second gala were unlike anything I had ever experienced, because for the first time in years, the house did not echo only with Cassandra's laughter and my muffled sobs, but with a tension she could not ignore, a weight that pressed against her perfect facade as whispers from the gala spread through the city, whispers that Cassandra's so-called maid sister was in fact the blood sister of Alexander Knight, the untouchable CEO, and people began to look at her differently, some with doubt, others with thinly veiled mockery, because the very foundation of her social power had been shaken. Yet Cassandra, stubborn and arrogant as ever, refused to back down, convinced that she could spin the narrative, convinced that her charm and beauty could outweigh one man's declaration. So she doubled her cruelty toward me in private, her voice sharp and venomous as she hissed, "Don't think this changes anything. You're still beneath me. You'll always be beneath me." And though her words still stung, they no longer pierced as deeply, because now I had Alexander's promise echoing in my chest, a reminder that I was not alone. And soon that promise grew even stronger when my other brothers arrived. First Adrian, whose brilliance in technology had made him a billionaire before 30, And then Ethan, whose empire of real estate stretched across continents, and when the three of them stood together in our home for the first time in years, I felt a safety, a love, a power I had nearly forgotten was possible. They embraced me fiercely, apologizing for the years they had missed, vowing that never again would I bow to anyone. And though tears blurred my vision, I knew in my soul they meant it. But Cassandra, seeing her control slipping, grew desperate, weaving lies to neighbors, insisting Alexander's words had been misunderstood, that I was only distantly related, clinging to whatever scraps of dignity she could, until the announcement came of the grandest gala of the season, one hosted by the Knight Corporation itself, the kind of event where alliances were forged, reputations cemented, and empires displayed their glory. And when Cassandra heard of it, she nearly choked on envy, desperate to attend, desperate to prove that she still belonged among the elite. But what she did not realize was that this gala would not be her triumph. It would be her undoing, because my brothers had planned everything. They had invited her and her mother, ensuring their presence, and though I trembled with nerves, they assured me, "Tonight the truth will shine, and she will never hurt you again." And so the night arrived, and the hall was unlike anything I had seen before, vast and glittering, golden lights spilling across marble floors, orchestras playing sweet symphonies, cameras flashing as the city's most powerful entered. And for the first time I was not shoved into a plain uniform but dressed in a gown of midnight blue, chosen by Adrian himself, my hair styled elegantly, my hands trembling not from carrying trays, but from holding the arm of my brother Ethan as we entered together, and gasps echoed across the hall because no one had expected me, the forgotten stepsister, the maid, to appear not as a servant, but as a guest, radiant and unrecognizable. And for the first time I felt eyes on me not with pity but with awe. Though the one pair of eyes that mattered most were Cassandra's, her face twisting in shock, her smile cracking as she saw me, saw the girl she had tormented glowing under the chandeliers, standing beside three of the most powerful men in the room. And for a moment she faltered. But pride is a dangerous thing, and Cassandra's pride was endless, so she forced her way, through the crowd, her crimson gown glittering, her mother trailing behind, and she greeted the brothers with false sweetness, her voice dripping with sugar. "Alexander, Adrian, Ethan, such an honor to see you here. I hope my silly stepsister hasn't troubled you too much with her fantasies." Her words sharp as knives disguised as silk, and for a heartbeat the room held its breath. But Alexander only smiled thinly, his voice calm but edged with steel. "The only fantasy here is the one you've lived, pretending to be a queen while treating my sister as a slave." His words rang out, clear and unyielding, and the room shifted, whispers rising, eyes locking on Cassandra, who paled beneath her painted face, stammering, I never... She's lying. She exaggerates." But Ethan stepped forward, his voice booming. "Enough, Cassandra. We know everything. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every time you made her bow while you laughed. And tonight, in front of the world, that ends." And before Cassandra could recover, before she could weave another lie, Adrian raised a hand, and screens around the hall flickered to life, showing images, videos, proof collected quietly by my brothers, of Cassandra mocking me, ordering me around, laughing with her friends as I carried trays, recordings of her voice sneering, "You're worthless, you'll never be anything." And the hall went silent, the gasps sharp, the shame radiating like fire, Cassandra's face drained of color as her lies unraveled, and in that silence Alexander turned to her, his voice cold as ice. "Kneel," he said, and though she shook her head, though pride kept her standing for a moment, the weight of the crowd's stares, the undeniable proof flashing above, the presence of three men whose power she could not deny, broke her, and slowly, trembling, Cassandra sank to her knees, her eyes darting, her lips quivering. And in that moment, the hall erupted, some gasping, some whispering, but all watching as the once proud Cassandra knelt before the sister she had tormented, and Alexander's voice thundered again. Apologize. And with tears streaming down her painted cheeks, Cassandra whispered, I'm sorry. Her words shaky, broken, and though part of me longed to relish in her downfall, another part, softer, wounded, simply felt release. Because in that moment, the weight of years lifted from my shoulders, and I realized I no longer needed her cruelty to define me. I no longer needed revenge to breathe, because I was free, free to stand tall, free to be seen. And as my brothers surrounded me, protective and proud, I looked at Cassandra one last time and said softly, May you learn from this, before turning away. And the applause that followed was not for her, not for my brothers, but for me, for the girl who had risen from the shadows, who had endured, and who now stood unbroken. And that night, as music rose again and the gala continued, I danced beneath the chandeliers not as a servant, but as a sister, a woman. And for the first time in my life, I felt the taste of dignity, of freedom, of love, knowing that the days of humiliation were behind me forever, and that no matter what lay ahead, I would never bow again.